Hello. Hi. Hi, Amrita. Hi, good evening, everyone. Good evening from Chennai. Hi, Meghna. Hey, Madhav. Hi, everyone. So, we are here to speak with Harini, who has just arrived. Harini, yeah, I have just received your invitation. Hi, namaste, everyone. Hi. Hi, Sapna. So, Harini, I just accepted your invitation. Let me accept it again.
Hi,
Hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Yeah.
Welcome, Harini,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
and congratulations. Now you're going to be a dancer, choreographer, published poet. So that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, so for those who don't know, we are here to speak with Harini Jeevitha, who really, as a dancer, needs no introduction, but perhaps as a poet needs some introduction. And I thought that it would be lovely for her to speak with Alap about the making of Perspectives. And for those who don't know, Perspectives is an illustrated anthology, a book of verse. And verbal art, of course, by Harini Jeevitha, supported by art um, supported in terms of art by Meghna Unni, and published by Notion Press. Perspectives, as a word, when you listen to the word perspectives, it has that quality of personal. It's a quality of subjective. It is something which is very your own, right? It gives you creative license, right? It sort of
True.
says that you have a point of view, right? It sort of gives you a certain dignity in terms of like, I have a perspective. So I skimmed through parts of the book, Harini, and thank you for sharing that with me. And I want to actually sit down with a mug of coffee over the weekend and read it. And I also want to see whether it needs to be read continuously, seamlessly like that, or does it need, could I read it in parts? And could I reread and come back? And I think that freedom is the freedom of the reader, right? How the reader wants
True.
to read it, right? So I'm looking forward to dabbling with the book. Um, but I'm curious to speak with you about how the book came about. So, firstly, I want to ask you, in your preface, you talk about how you say that I'm not a habitual writer. In fact, I think that's the first sentence in the preface. You say, I'm not a habitual writer. And you also talk about, I just want to ask you basically, you let me read that part out actually. You say, I'm not a habitual
Yeah, sure.
writer. Therefore, I consider my brief, unexpected encounters with writing special. The poems happen sometimes in the busiest streets and sometimes in the middle of a night's deep sleep, mostly to be forgotten the next morning. Out of all the pieces of writing that have happened so far, this one has taken the longest to arrive, this preface. I have waited for months for the right words because there is a lot to be said and many to be left unsaid. I thought this was very, very beautiful, Harini. So I want to ask you, when did writing actually, even if not habitual, happen in your life?
Mm. All right. So I think by nature, I'm someone who doesn't speak much. So, and I'm more comfortable expressing my emotions through writing, especially when it is intense emotions. And now when I look back, I think my trysts with writing began when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. Those were the times when my mother used to scold me, and I wouldn't usually give her a word of reply. I would be hurt, and I would be feeling guilty. So what I would do is I would just rush to the balcony with a piece of paper and pencil and write a note to her saying why I did a certain mistake and that I wouldn't repeat it. I remember these scenes
Wow.
so vividly. And then when I gave it to her, I saw that she was impressed and pleased. So that's how my trysts with writing began, I think.
Interesting.
And as
Yeah.
someone who has been, who was brought up in an atmosphere which involved a lot of association with literature and with creativity right from childhood, I was always in dance class. And so I think that sort of made me inclined to literature and a creative approach to literature. And I think that could have probably made me want to write. And I think I wrote my first poem in 2008, and that was about dance, in fact. And I remember it was a very strict AABB rhyme scheme, and I wrote that for our dance school's souvenir magazine. And that was quite well received by my teachers, my dance teachers, and my friends. And then slowly I started exploring writing a bit. And then my friends started to recognize me as someone who likes to write. And they came to me with doubts in English. And that sort of made me feel good. And, apart from recognizing me as the dancer who was hardly seen in class, they also started recognizing this side of me. And one particular moment which sort of gave me a reassurance to my love for writing was when I was in my 10th grade. My English teacher, she was distributing the answer sheets of the exam. And then, when she saw my answer paper, she was like, who's roll number 5? And then I raised my hand with a lot of fear, because I was wondering if I had scored a fail mark or was it a centum in English. So I just raised my hand, and then she looked at me and she said, excellent. And that sort of, like gave me a lot of reassurance. And that's the moment when I decided that I would take up English literature in college. And so I took up literature in college, and that really opened up a lot of windows to me. And it brought me closer to dance. It made me explore writing. And yeah, it was one of the best paths that I have traveled on so far. So that's how my writing expeditions started. And thanks to my dance teacher also, Sheila ma'am, she usually encourages me to write stuff for our dance schools works, for productions, synopsis, or for the pieces that we create. So that's a sort of kept me engaged with writing often. So yeah, that's how it all started.
Lovely. I mean, it's interesting, Harini, that you speak about the two most important people who validated your writing in a certain way. One, your mother,
Exactly.
who was clearly pleased even with your, your grunts and not
Notes
so
of
happy
apology.
things. And of course, your teacher, right?
Of
Finally,
course.
the mother and the teacher have such a crucial role to play in terms of validating, right? And we all seek and need that validation every once in a while. So fantastic. Harini, also in the preface, as you clearly see that I have been, you told me that the preface took you the longest time, and I spent most time actually in the preface. So I want to ask you that, you also talk about the universe in the preface, and you talk about the power of the universe to send these silent and strong signals, right? And I want to ask you that as a, I've heard you speak before, and as somebody who is also spiritually anchored, I want to ask you what you believe is the power of the universe, and why does one need to be alert to these signals? Like, for example, the fact that you wrote this must have been some kind of a signal from the universe that finally all the poetry that you had been writing had to culminate at this time, right? So I'm curious about these listening to the universe.
All right. So speaking from a so-called creator point of view, as someone who is just embarking on the creative side of the art form that I practice, I think we are sometimes we are put in a situation as to we have to choose between intuition and intelligence, especially when we are creating a work. And when that dilemma comes as to which one to choose, I usually just give it a break. I don't force myself into arriving at a conclusion. Personally, for me, the creative process has to flow naturally. So at those times, I kind of wait for signals from the universe. It might sound a little romantic, a little silly as well, but it
So
has
what?
worked. Yeah, it has worked wonders for me, especially when it comes to creating a piece in dance. And a lot of times while I was working on creating this book, so I think listening to signals is, it might sound, I don't know, again, quite romantic, but the idea is to have faith. It is to believe that there is a certain force which will make things happen, and just,
Happen.
you can relax. It will happen. So it teaches me to trust. It teaches me faith. It teaches me to hold on, no matter what odds we face. So that is the major lesson that I have learned from the so-called signals from the universe. And when it comes to this book, the signal that I got for this book was from the translations that I was reading during the lockdown. So I had a back injury in the beginning of last year. So I was on rest, and therefore I had to spend some time, I had to just divert my mind. And I was reading some translations of Indian literary works. And when I read them, I sort of got a reassurance from those works that, like, um, that sort of made me feel that I was not saying anything wrong. So that gave me a confidence and a sort of nudge to go ahead and publish my works, even though I had a few people tell me to, ask me to publish my works earlier. This gave me the confidence to go ahead with the publication process. So that was the signal that
Lovely.
I got. But the thing is that sometimes we get the signals immediately, but sometimes we have to wait for years. In this case, I have waited for almost
Absolutely.
5 to 6 years. So yeah,
Right. Yeah.
that's how it
I
works.
mean, you do realize that everything that you're saying sounds so damn romantic. And I want to tell you that it's okay, because now, by virtue of becoming
Yeah,
also a poet, not just a dancer, you have earned the right to
I
be
know.
romantic.
I know.
So anyway, Harini, moving on. You also talk about, you talk about how the poetry in a certain way flows for you. But the preface, you talked about how it took you the longest time to consciously construct it, because you wanted to be sure that the choice of words, the use of words, what was said, what was unsaid was very, very constructed. Would you think, therefore, that poetry is a bit forgiving in terms of
Mhm.
its form and expression, but prose is way more demanding, because the preface is in prose,
Yeah.
and your the book is poems. So
That's very true, because I think poetry is a universe in itself with its own rules, or rather the absence of it. Poetry doesn't have rules many a times. And one more reason why I took a lot of time for the preface is probably because I was under the pressure that, that is the first voice that people would hear of me.
people here,
Like,
yeah,
yeah, so that was probably a pressure that was there subconsciously. And again, yeah, I never force myself to write anything. So I was just waiting and waiting for the right words for almost 2 to 3 months for the preface, because I had a lot of things to say, but at the same time, I somehow didn't want to say it because it would just spoil the thrill of it. So this preface happened at 3 a.m. one fine morning. I just woke up and pen down whatever came to my mind and then fine tuned it. So that's how this preface happened. But as you say, poetry is more forgiving. It just
yeah,
for that
yeah,
matter, any work of creativity, I think once you surrender to it, it will swallow you. You just have to let it engulf you. That's
yeah,
about it.
yeah. Beautiful. Harini, I think 2 3 times already we've heard the word waiting from you. Waiting. I've been waiting, you say. I'm
Yeah.
curious about this. Waiting itself is actually, it's not easy to wait. I mean, waiting itself is a very, very, like, I, for example, I'm inherently a
Mhm.
restless human being. I just cannot wait. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
waiting
Mhm.
requires a great amount of patience. It requires a great amount of sort of sadhana in itself, right? I want to ask
Mhm.
you that, in a certain way, does the book of poems come at a time in your life when you've been through this journey already, this one big creative journey, which is in dance, which has already taught you all of these lessons, right? In sadhana, in rigor, in whatever. So in a certain way, when you come to this, do you bring to it all the lessons that you have learned as a creative person already in another space, no doubt?
I think it should, I mean, like, it is not possible to completely neglect that influence, because at the end of the day, poetry is an expression of what you think, what you feel. So I think it should be a culmination of my experiences, however fleeting they were. And some of it should be what I have heard, just through knowledge. So it should be a mixture of my thoughts, my experiences, the lessons that I have learned, and yeah, that's what comes out as poetry. And I would rather, I would like to think of my poems as it comes from a place of honesty for sure, just like how dance would. But since I'm not a trained writer, I don't call myself a writer at all, in the first place. So I think poetry is more, it is a reflection of my imperfections too. So that's what makes poetry special in a way.
Nice. Okay. I also want to ask you that, when you say perspectives, right? I'm curious whether you're referring to all of perspectives which are your own. And also, did that title in a certain way give you the liberty, like sanction you to, you know, like take creative license, so to speak? Like, like moment you say perspectives, nobody can question. It's your perspective, right? So did it sort of,
Exactly.
in the beginning itself, like give you that freedom to kind of fly without ever feeling that that's my content, or that's like, I said this was my point of view. You're clearly saying perspectives. So it's like a sort of an
Exactly.
open title. So I'm curious about that, Harini.
Yeah, that's an interesting point here. Actually, the title perspectives also happened 4 or 5 years earlier. Like when I had the thought of publishing an anthology, I thought, okay, the title would be perspectives. I don't know for what reason, but this was the title which was always ringing in my ears. And again, I got a signal from the universe approving that title in a few days after I decided that this would be my title. And again, this is a beautiful coincidence that the book is not just my perspectives. There are other beautiful connections which make the title more relevant. The first thing is that we have the three margams mentioned in the book: Jnana Margam, Karma Margam, and Bhakti Margam, which are the three paths that we as human beings travel. And even though the destination is same, we choose different paths at different points of time. One human can travel on all the paths at different points of time. So, and from the perspective or the point of view that we get from each path is different, which makes it a perspective in itself. And also, this book has words of other writers, of other Indian
Yeah, that's right.
literary works, which
Yeah,
again gives us perspectives of other writers. So this has sort of happened again, like it
yeah,
gelled beautifully. It's not just my
yeah,
perspectives, it is the perspectives of those who travel on the three paths. It is the perspectives of the Indian literary works in general. And again, it is up to you to perceive it in a way that you would want to perceive it.
yeah.
I would like to say
Absolutely, yeah.
that the world is made up of perspectives. So yeah, the title just
And
happened beautifully.
yeah, yeah, and perspectives are crucial, right? Especially in the world that we are in, right? So as you say,
True.
as I see it now, Harni, that's like the book is really like a layering of perspectives. It's like layered, and it's up to the reader
Exactly.
to unpeel those layers the way they'd like to do, right?
True.
Okay,
True.
I
Right.
want to ask you a little bit about, as a creative person, showcasing your work to an audience isn't hard. Like you've done that, you've gone up on stage right from when you were young, and you've shown your work, you've created work, all of that. But in a book of poems, in a certain way, in somehow in dance, and I may be wrong, Harini, in dance somehow you have like, you're portraying a story, you're portraying a character, you're telling
All right.
someone's story, and you're making it, you're inhabiting a character. But in a book of
True.
poems, you're actually laying bare and you're actually vulnerable and telling people
Exactly.
about, in a certain way, it's about you. I want to ask you, therefore, that in a certain way, has this book of poems forced you to become more vulnerable than you are as a dancer?
All right, yeah. As I was telling you, I do not call myself a writer at all, and I might not know the grammar to its fullest, and I cannot quote poets at the tip of my fingers. But I love writing, therefore I write. So when you compare dance and writing to me, I have been trained in dance right from my childhood, but I'm not a trained writer. I write because it just flows, it just happens. So first of all, when it comes to writing, there was absolutely no fear of judgment. All right, so I just wrote for the sake of happiness, even though I dance for the sake of happiness too. But this is a totally different sphere altogether. And
Yeah.
so coming to the point of vulnerability, again, as I told you, I think I would like to call poetry as a portrayal of my imperfections too. And I have no regrets about it. And in fact, while choosing the poems, I was quite conscious. I was wondering if I was ready to give this poem to the readers, if I was ready to share this particular poem. I chose them with a lot of care while choosing the poems. But yeah, I'm not very picky about the rhyme scheme or the words. In fact, my friends in college, they used to be shocked when I told them that I don't edit my poems. Like when it happens, I just leave it like that. Now they once asked me as to how many times I edit my poems, and I said no, I don't edit them at all. But of course, when it has to be, when it comes out as a book, I have to do a little bit of editing here and there. But yeah, otherwise I don't edit the poems. I just leave it as it happens.
Lovely, lovely. Um, um, Harini, I just want you to explain a little bit about the philosophy of the jnana, karma, and bhakti that you have brought in. Did that happen
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning itself, like before you started writing,
All right.
or had you written and then you decided that, like for example, like in like a theme dance production, right? You have these different pieces and then you
Mm-hmm.
put
Mm-hmm.
them together sometimes, or sometimes you
Mm-hmm.
say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm going to start. I'm going to create individual pieces that fit under this. So I'm curious, like
Mm-hmm.
what
Mm-hmm.
came first?
Okay, yeah. Again, when you compare it with a themed production, usually we have a concept for a themed production, and then once we have a concept, we go in search of texts, or we ask someone to write lyrics for it, and then we ask a music composer to compose the music, and then we plan the choreography, and then we execute it. But here I think it was just the ulta. First the execution was done, the poems were ready, and then I went in search of music, which is the sketches. I asked my illustrator to do the sketches, therefore adding music, and then I went in search of lyrics, that is the words, texts, which came as epigraphs to each of the poems, and then arrived the concept of the three margams. So by
Nice.
December last year, I had finalized the poems that I wanted to put in the book. And then when I was, thinking of an order or a sequence for the poems, it just struck me that, in fact, they fall into the categories of the three margams. Again, this was not at all planned. It was pure happenstance, and it just fell in place. And I categorized them into the three categories. And then, that's how we arrived at the three margams. And again, I saw that it coincides with the title of the book as well. So the concept
Lovely,
arrived
beautiful.
only in January this year, after
Yeah.
almost 80% of the
All
work
of,
was done.
yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I know that your professor of English literature talks about how, I think she's referred to the pace of your poetry itself
Yes.
across these three phases, right? And I haven't yet fully completed the book, so I'm not yet sure or able to comment on the pace, but I intend to do that because that line really struck me. She said how that the
Mhm.
pace shifts and how in the Bhakti Margam your voice acquires a
Mm.
different kind of a serenity, so to
Mm.
speak, right? So I'm very
Mm.
curious about the karma, the doer, and the bhakti, which is more settled. So yeah, um, Harini, like you are really as a dancer known for also your inventiveness and your out of the box, thinking, constantly innovation in some ways, right? Um, did you find yourself, and I may be repeating a question, so correct me if I'm wrong, but did you find yourself
Mhm.
having to carry that responsibility that people often associate with you? So, like if you're a new time, first time poet, you don't have anything,
I
right?
know.
Like people just think of you as a poet. But here is Harini Jeevitha. We already think of Harini Jeevitha as a certain way. We know that she's a dancer. We know that she does this. Then you're bringing that
Mm.
responsibility also. So I'm asking you, did you feel like the weight of that responsibility as somebody who's inventive, out of the box, when you publish this book, so to speak?
All right. First of all, I really wonder what I have done to, like call me as someone who thinks out of the box when it comes to dancing. I'm just a newbie when it comes to choreography. So, thankfully, fortunately for me, I wrote most of the poems in this book when I did not have the plan of publishing them as, as a book. And certainly, I did not have any burden of, you know, I mean, like, as I told you, it just flows. In fact, I remember the instances in which I wrote the poems, but I have no clue of how I wrote them. In fact, one of the poems in this book, it is in the Andadi format. Andadi is it is a form of Tamil poetry where I'm sure you would have heard of Abhirami
Yeah,
Andadi.
Abhirami
It's a
Andani, yeah.
beautiful format where the last word of the verse becomes the first word of the next verse. So the chain continues,
Yeah,
and the last word of the last verse will be the first word of the first verse.
first
So
verse.
that's how Andadi
Beautiful.
works.
Yeah.
So Abhirami Andadi starts with Udikkindra Senkadir, and the last word is Udikkindrave. That's how it finishes. The last verse.
Yeah.
So in fact, there is a poem in this book which has happened in the Andadi format,
Yeah.
and that was certainly not a conscious effort at all. It in fact happened when I had gone to the US to meet my brother, and we went on a hike, and that poem just happened when he parked the car in the parking lot, and we both were like walking to the starting point of the hike. In those
The hike.
3 or 4 minutes, that flow happened. I mean, that poem just happened as I was just looking at the scenery around me. So yeah, so coming back to the point, I have never felt the pressure to kind of follow any certain rules or regulations, because I think it comes from, as they say, ignorance is bliss. So it comes from a place of oblivion and honesty. So there was no pressure of succumbing to a certain image or an impression when I wrote the poems, and I hope it remains the same way. That's what
No,
makes
that's
poetry special to me.
no, absolutely. Like you rightly said, like a place for honesty, right? So I think that's great. One of my favorite poems in the anthology, Harini, had, I mean, no points for guessing, is the writer's block. Um, you know, I'm going to just read a little bit about it, or if you have a copy of the book, you could
Yeah,
read it as well. Yeah, I'd love for you
yeah,
to read the bit that goes starts with "It yields not to my cat swallow cries." Could you just read that bit right up to "and Quill will have to say"?
yes, yes. Huh. It yields not to my Cotswold cries. It comes only when it comes. It is a fastidious old friend. It comes only when it comes. Like the heavy clouds that hold up and burst open all of a sudden, it will happen one day. Until then, the parchment and quill will have to stay.
Yeah, I thought that was beautiful. And as a creative person, Harini, perhaps you're used to these blocks, right? You're used to
Certainly.
kind of dealing with these creative blocks, right? Yeah. So how do you kind of cope with them? Like how do you deal with them?
Again, I think the best way is to not force it. Like you're lucky if you have enough time in hand to work on a certain piece. So it's best not to force your creativity. That's my policy. And when you do that, I think you will witness the magic happening, when you don't force the process. So that's the only way you can overcome writer's block.
Creative block,
Just
right?
stay with it.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
enjoy the block, and when it's gone, then just enjoy the relief
Yeah.
from it. That's it. There is no other
Right.
way to get
Absolutely.
rid of the writer's block.
Right. I just want to ask you one or two questions, Harini, before I let you go, and that is really about your co-traveler in this book, which is Meghana Unni.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to
Yes.
talk to us a little bit about how she is, how her art has lent another layer of perspective, right? And even though it is in a
True.
certain way inspired or is a reflection of your perspective, it still is her
Mm-hmm.
perspective of your perspective, right? So I want you to talk a little bit about how it was to collaborate with her.
Yeah, first of all, Meghna is from Sri Devi Nrityalaya. So she's an extremely talented kid. She's 17 years old, and she's very enthusiastic and dedicated in whatever she takes up. So the first person who came to my mind when I thought I want to have illustrations for the poems was Meghna, and she was quite shocked when I told her that, Meghna, I want you to do this for me, and she was quite surprised because she's not used to this kind of a work. So what I did was I would send her a poem, and then I would ask her what she felt or what visuals came to her mind. And since she was not, very experienced in this kind of interpreting poetry and then putting it into a picture, I would give her ideas as to what I wanted in the illustration. And again, that took me equally long time as to how much I spent for writing the poems. So I had to just wait and wait for the right ideas to come, and then I would tell her, this is what I have in mind, Meghna. Can you just show me a rough sketch of this? And she would do the rough sketch and then send it to me, and then we would work on modifying it a bit, and that's how it happened. Almost for a year, we worked on the illustrations, and then once I was
Right.
convinced with the ideas, then we went for the final sketches. So I should say that the process was a little overwhelming for me, at times, but it was Meghna's enthusiasm and dedication which kept me going. She would just send me a message saying, "Akka, when are you sending me the next poem?" And that sort of kept me going. And I should thank her because she has been the anchor to this ship. Her constant enthusiasm and dedication has been one of the major reasons for this book to happen today.
No, absolutely. Like I said, that it has sort of added one more layer to the whole, thing. Somebody wants to know: would
Definitely,
you recommend
yes.
this book for dancers in specific, and why?
I wouldn't. I mean, like, I don't know if dancers would be interested in this in particular, but as you said, there are some. I wouldn't call it philosophical because that would sound, otherworldly or alien. But these are things which we experience on a daily basis, on a day-to-day basis, and any person who is in search of answers would be able to relate to this, is what I feel. It need not be dancers in particular.
Exactly. Yeah. I think anybody and everybody should be reading. So I think words is something that everyone must engage with. So, yeah, I think there is her motivation to write the book. I think we've addressed that already. Any advice to newbie poets who are looking to publish?
Sorry? Could
Any
you repeat
advice
the
to
question?
newbie poets who are looking to publish?
Oh. Yeah, I mean, if you're keen about publishing your work, go ahead, do it with a lot of conviction. Do your hard work. It has to be a thoroughly researched work. And yeah, conviction plays an important role. So do it with all conviction.
Right. We'll just do one question more. It's from Arundhati, and she wants to know, was it hard trying to fit in the poems into a specific margam? Did you have to leave out a few poems?
Yes, I did have to leave out a few poems, but not many. Maybe I just had to drop 2 or 3 poems. But it was not very hard to fit them into the 3 categories. It happened quite organically.
Right. Harini, thank you so much. I know that, in a world that is already opened up and everybody has started going out, I want to keep Instagram conversations tight and taut so that, we're not, keeping people glued to their screens for too long. So, and I think people should read the book because we've given them enough insights into the book. You've given them enough insights. So I think they should go now and read the book. Do pick up a copy of the book and support new writers. And thank you, Harini, for agreeing
Thank
to
you
be
so
in
much.
conversation with me. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
All the
Thanks
best.
a lot. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.